One of the joys in life for me now, and I have a simple philosophy every day, is be kind, be present, and be better.
Meet Mike Joubert, an investor, mentor, and changemaker with over 35 years of transformative leadership experience.
I've invested in 3 100% black-owned businesses. Those I don't have any equity. My only request of the entrepreneurs is you have to pay it forward. Lucky, at the time with a matric, he was working for an electrician, got paid pittance. He now runs a building company called Ngojo. He chose the name, so his surname is Ngoloti and I'm Joubert, so Ngojo.
Wow.
He runs 3 teams. He's got 3 vehicles. Lucky is a grafter. Grit, resilience. And I said to him, Lucky, when you start your business, particularly in building, your word is your bond. You've got to engender trust, build a brand. And thirdly, if you say you're going to do something by Friday, do it. And if it doesn't work out, you give the money back. It's okay to pay it forward. It is in fact imperative. If you are successful, you have to pay it forward.
You mentioned 3 influential mentors. Could you please give me one lesson from each of them?
My lesson from Dr. Rupert is so we have this dichotomy in South Africa. So we have huge unemployment. Youth unemployment is over 50%. However, we have a digital skills deficit. We just don't have digital skills enough in South Africa for companies, right? So they're offshore, Ukraine, India, Pakistan. And we should be using our own, our own people.
Is it a skills problem?
Skills. And the ability to train in those skills.
What's the focus of?
So Collective X stimulates digital skills training in 17 categories. However, most importantly, we also help particularly young people then to be work ready. So now that you've got coding skills, how do you go about getting a job? We also match skills requirements out of companies. We just recently done one for Capitec. So Capitec's looking for 5 Ruby on Rails developers. So this ecosystem now provides it. So it's almost a community where it's a bit like Uber for digital skills.
I love it.
Yeah.
So essentially, the companies they of course provide perhaps funding.
They do provide funding, and then they get access to skills. They get preference.
They get preference to talent.
Yeah.
And of course, highly skilled, capable talent.
Exactly.
I like that model. Compared to yourself after reading your LinkedIn and just looking at some of the things that you guys do, your time is split. It's almost now as if you're sitting on the other side of the table.
Correct. To be transparent, I have a very deep regard for and support of any entrepreneur, particularly African entrepreneurs, which you clearly are. But you have an additional ability to spread learnings and insights, which in and of itself is very useful. These days, if I look at some of these networking events, you can go and get someone's business card, but if you sit and listen to someone who might have done what you're about to do, you just get learnings.
100%.
And I believe one of the reasons why podcasts have just grown from strength to strength, especially those that are relevant, is because it offers a different channel in a more natural way.
100%.
Not highly produced, it's more natural conversations.
I was also asking myself that question about why has podcasting been growing and actually surpassing traditional media from a perhaps advertising spin.
Yeah.
I think it's, yes, definitely the conversational part, but I also think it's the authenticity of people that are willing to share their experience and what they've been through, which, it's like the analogy is looking behind the curtain. When I was growing up and who I was exposed to is perhaps just a bubble.
Yes.
But listening to podcasts now about successful people, I feel like I'm looking behind the curtain and actually
and you're lucky because you get a concentrated version of many people.
100%.
Which I have to assume you also personally get inspired by. Probably teaches you a little bit of something along the way.
Yes. It's a bit selfish in that regard.
Because I'm it's a good thing.
Asking questions that interest me, that I want to learn about. But I know that many other people also want to learn about this.
And certainly those that I've listened to and watched, you have a wonderful bedside manner. You do your homework, that's clear, I've known Mark for a very long time. As a comedian, I was involved in comedy years ago through Diageo. And I love how he recounted his story, how he just invited some mates around and said, look, I'm going to do a bit of stand-up before we start at this venue.
Were you at the party?
No. No, we have a lot of mutual friends, and I've just known him for a long time. So
yeah,
I was chairman of Quicket, actually indirectly invested in Quicket through Knife. I was chairman of Quicket, and then I just led the exit with Ticketmaster. But when COVID
Congratulations.
hit, yeah, thank you. When COVID hit, obviously the business lost 99% of its revenue. It took us about 3 months to figure out. So I backed the founders during that period. And then Mark was our very first guinea pig. He had shows booked which was cancelled. We said, look, would you mind doing a live version on camera? And we'll do the booking for you, and we'll give you all the income. Like, we'll take a very small percentage because we don't know if it'll work or not. And of course, the result was it was a huge success.
Was this in 2020?
Yeah. It was, I think, July or August. Mark made a lot of money. He made more money with that one gig than he did because of online. So we had South Africans from Canada and the UK and Australia.
Amazing.
Expats. Because our friends sent to family overseas. All you had to do is click, book. I think it was something like 70 Rand a ticket. It wasn't even expensive. But because it's unlimited, right? You can have as many people watch as you want. So, and then we realized with Quicket we're onto something. So we started with online comedy. We went to corporates who still couldn't have people come in. But some of the big corporates said, look, this is a great way. So we have an event. You log into Quicket to say that you're attending, because it's got a dashboard, so you can see who's attended. So you can't say, well, I'll listen to it on Zoom and not pitch up. Anyway.
Just on this point, how much of the board's influence was, perhaps impacted the growth of the company compared to perhaps the operation team and the executive team and founders?
It's a good question. Look, from a Quicket board perspective, I had worked for CompuTicket in the 90s, so I understood ticketing. And I had met the guys when they were still in startup mode. And I had by then already invested in Knife Capital. And I suggested to Knife, you need to invest in this business. It's going to be bigger than CompuTicket. And it is now, way bigger. But from a board point of view, I was non-exec chairman, but I did do quite a bit of strategy with founders. Because by the very nature, they were younger, very smart, 3 incredibly smart guys. And then helped them navigate through COVID. And the acquisition by Ticketmaster, I just happened to know the Ticketmaster CEO, Justin van Wyk. So he's Ati van Wyk's son, who started Big Concerts, and Live Nation bought Big Concerts, and then made Justin Ticketmaster CEO. And it was a good strategic fit because Ticketmaster at that time had no presence in Africa, whereas Quicket is in 8 countries. So it worked out. It was a strategic acquisition as opposed to buying for EBITDA or anything else.
Got you. So essentially, from the time that, was it Knife that invested in 2020?
No, Knife invested in 2017.
2017?
Yeah.
Okay, so
it was
7
before,
years.
and when COVID hit, Knife was a little bit reluctant, as they should be, because they're dealing with LPs' money.
Yeah.
Like nobody could predict, and VCs by their very nature don't provide loans.
Yeah.
So...
and did you invest in a personal capacity in 2020?
No, I just backed the founders. So if you personally need capital, I'll help you.
Got you.
So that was more just, and for 6 months, it was more just to say, don't pack it in. When there are quite a few events-based companies around the world that went under during that time.
I can imagine.
So, it was particularly tough on hospitality and entertainment.
Of course. I speak a lot about this idea with my friends about you either a product of your environment or as a result. And I'll give you an example. You grew up in a home where perhaps your parents were alcoholics.
Right.
Either you become an alcoholic or you never touch liquor again.
Right.
Which category do you fall in?
I'd say the second one.
Why?
I grew up in a good Afrikaans home. Grew up in Belleville and in Pretoria, half. Nationalist Party, good Christian home. Great parents, though, let me just say. And I realized there must be more to life. And as a result, it put me on a track that led me to you today. But a positive one. So knowing who I am, where I came from, I'm a very proud Afrikaans-speaking South African, and I would never abdicate that. But I have a very strong belief that through the course of my life and my career, I've been able to navigate and do things that hopefully has made certainly my immediate environment a better place.
I think also the reason for my question is to understand the type of environment that you grew up in, because that really shapes us, right? You see experiences that we went through in our childhood really play out in our adult life. Sometimes we don't have that awareness to understand why we are the way we are.
Correct.
And so really that's like the intention for the question.
Yeah, look, I was very privileged. So certainly in the beginning, I didn't really know my biological father, but my mom remarried. And my dad, for all intents and purposes, was my dad. And he was incredibly loving, and he was a coach and a mentor eventually. But as a result, he was also incredibly well-read at the time and traveled a lot. So before the internet, we used to get Encyclopedia Britannicus assignments from my dad. So go and research this and do that. He was telling us about what television is before we even had in South Africa, how the technology worked. So that curiosity was instilled in me and my two brothers from a very early age. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. Because we might as well have just lived a very interesting life, go to school, go to university. And it was really Dad who stimulated. Be curious, find out how things work, understand context. Like, why are you doing this? Don't just do it because the government says or the church says. Like, really question why you're doing things. And to a large degree, I only really have 3 mentors, and my dad was one of them, and he helped shape that path as we went along. My mom, in turn, was just one of those most magnificent people in most families who just took care of the world. Like, all our friends always came for dinner and lunch. There was always something to eat at the table. There was always a bed for people to sleep in. Mom was just the perfect mom. And at the same time, she also had a number of entrepreneurial adventures. She started the cottage industry in Pretoria. She sold Tupperware, made manager, got a car, Ford Escort, and then had to choose between cottage industry or Tupperware. She chose cottage industry. So there was always freshly baked tarts and cakes in the house. So from that point of view, it was a very warm upbringing. And with Dad sort of stimulating curiosity, at an early age, at school already, started realizing there's something wrong in our country. How can you make a difference? So I was a Zulu Sunday school teacher for 2 years at school, Standard 9 and Matric.
Who did you teach?
A little primary school outside of Pretoria called Wazenebone. So I was known as Mfundis. I had to use some of the teachers as translators. I still speak Zulu, but quite a pidgin version of it. But in hindsight, it was more of oh, shame, let me see if I can help. And I have subsequently realized that was a great experience, but it also exposed me to some of the inequalities we had in the country. I then did military service after school, which I don't really talk about, but I then realized things are really, probably can't swear on your podcast, but it's effed up. But in and of itself, it was a great learning experience. I came back, went to University of Pretoria, didn't want to stay in a hostel. I was still sort of trying to get through what had just happened. And at university, I got involved in RAG, which is really Joel in Afrikaans, which is a charity in Stellenbosch. It's called Carnaval. So you raise money for charity and then you give it out. And I was involved in RAG for 4 years, like 3 years at Tukkies, and then my last year, chairman of National RAG. And then my other mentor was the late Dr. Anton Rupert. And so him and he was our chancellor, and our vice chancellor called me into the vice chancellor's office and kind of coaxed me, I guess, to stand for the SRC. So I had no interest in SRC because it was a very conservative university. So I said yes, and unbeknownst to me, there was a whole process already going, so I became SRC president at Tukkies. But the next year, 1988, was the first time in history that University of Pretoria allowed black students to stay on campus. And so that was part of the whole orchestration, if you will. And I, for the first time, really understood you can make a difference, but to make a difference, you need to volunteer. You need to step into a leadership position where you can affect change. I'd say that was probably my biggest learning experience from a leadership point of view, was my year as SRC president at Tuckies in an incredibly volatile but exciting time in our history.
You mentioned that you experienced things to be, for better word, effed up. Why was that?
You know, I grew up as a white South African in an Afrikaans environment, so I had no idea what the politics of our country looked like. I felt like many South Africans, just, country's great, everything works. When I finished Tuckies, I went to MBA. Dr. Rupert sponsored me, and my thesis was Black economic empowerment with specific reference to the informal sector. I started that in 1989 and finished in 1990. Half my research material was banned. Like the history of the ANC by Francis Melly was still banned as a book. But I got academic dispensation, and the more I read up and learned and researched just on the laws that prohibited South Africans that weren't white in this country, it was obscene. And it was, I guess, complicated by the fact that all around the world over many centuries you've had, Western countries colonizing.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't necessarily so interested in the political ramifications rather than understanding, because if you are going to make a difference or try and make a difference, you need to understand the history, but the unbiased history, unvarnished and unfiltered. And that was incredibly useful.
It's also interesting because you essentially were, reading up and upskilling yourself and, improving or just getting an understanding of what's going on.
Correct.
But I feel like perhaps a person who, reads would not have the same opinion. And they would always assume, or perhaps assume that, oh no, this is the way things were always done. But you actually were like, this is wrong.
Yeah, that's a very astute observation. I must congratulate you. That's exactly it. Someone once said, history is written by the victors. And when you read, I still encourage it on a daily basis. Anybody who asks, read. And if there's a particular subject, read everybody's view on it. And if it's politics, always understand all sides, which is one of the reasons why I love podcasts, because it is a way of not reading but listening while you drive. It's a way of hearing from other people. Some of what Ntetu shared in one of your podcasts resonated with me, because I know the backstory to that. And so your perspective, or we have the opportunity or the gift to broaden our perspective and broaden our contextual abilities by reading, by listening, and by provoking. I am a big fan of Obama's, and I read actually all his books, except the last one I listened to on an audiobook. But his second book, he speaks about how, as he grew up in politics, he most valued having fundamental differences with other politicians, but stepping away from a debate with respect. And that was well proven when he ran against John McCain. So John McCain on many occasions stepped in to his audience, Republican audience, said, don't degrade Mr. Obama, right? He's a worthy opponent. And so McCain had huge respect for Obama, as he did for McCain, which, of course, in the last election, you didn't see any of that. It was just, it was a slugfest of note. But anyway, the point there is that I still believe, particularly from a leadership point of view, it's important to have an opinion. It's important to guide and lead. But it's also important to keep an open mind. So if you come well prepared to a conversation and someone meets or beats what your opinion is, then embrace that and say, okay, I didn't think of that.
I think it's also a security in yourself.
Correct.
Because if you're secure in yourself and your character and who you are, and whoever has an opinion that's different from yours, I don't think that you're going to take it personally.
Exactly.
It's more of a, oh, that's interesting.
Well, look, I would be the first to admit, when I'm generalizing a lot, forgive me, but when I was young, like many people of my age at the time, you have very distinct views on life, and you have an ego, which is as yet really still driven to make you achieve all the, like, finish varsity well, get the girl, get the job, right, buy the first BMW, those kinds of things. And then your business card is more important than what you actually do. And I'm exaggerating, but that's ego. ego by its very nature is crucial at any age in life. But I just have felt over time, I'd say in the last 10 years, I understand my ego. It's a healthy one. But it's subservient now to so many other things where it's just not important for me anymore to be a person who, is top of this or that. So one of the joys in life for me now, and I have a simple philosophy every day, is be kind, be present, and be better. So the be kind part is difficult because, you often test it. Am I really being kind? Being better is what can I learn today? And being present is one that I deeply encourage and believe in. So if I'm going to be involved in a meeting or in a podcast, do your homework. Like respect the person you're having a meeting with or the group that you're going to meet with. Respect them to prepare. Because you're essentially taking an hour or hour and a half's time of someone. Right? So why would you not do that? So it's...
I think the third one is the most difficult for people to do, especially in an attention-driven economy.
Correct.
Where we're so distracted by everything around us. I mean, we could be at a dinner table and ping, phone goes off. There's something in us that has to look right now.
Yep.
While we're having a conversation. I think that's very difficult. It has to be practiced. How did you, improve that?
Discipline. So, I've yet to meet someone who hasn't read Atomic Habits. But there's truth in that. And the thing about any habit is it requires discipline. If you want to look great and you want to go to gym, you got to put in the effort. And it's the same with, with time and with being present. Having said that, if I use the science or statistically, I still fall short. I mean, there are times where I'm not really present. I'm thinking of, I don't know, there's a tax bill looming or there's this presentation or something's happened at work. But for the most part, I consciously prepare for any interaction with someone that's not family. Family is easy for me because my time with my family is sacred. And I've managed quite a while ago to just put everything aside. I weave my projects and my professional stuff in between my family, my health, and my time. But for anything professional, do the homework, do the preparation. And what I have found, almost as an unintended consequence, is I feel much more inspired when I leave because I paid attention. I learned something. It sounds weird, but it's that realization, actually I know nothing. You don't really know anything. Even looking at the bookshelf outside when I was waiting for you, it's like, oh, there's a book, I still got to read that. And then I realized, well, I've got so many books already that I've bought that I haven't read yet. So it's the comfort of knowing I have the book is enough for now. Maybe eventually I will read it.
It's also humility, right? I think that is...
that's a good point.
A character... Is it a character trait? Humility, perhaps, yes. I think that everyone can develop it. So perhaps it is a character trait to know that you don't know everything. Because if I'm running this business and I'm like, this is the way things are going to be done because of X, Y, and Z, I'm going to hit a wall very quickly and I'm going to experience lots of failure.
No, but I mean, again, very astute. The thing about arrogance and confidence, I view it as a spectrum. So on this side, you get, let me not name him, but like American president arrogance and narcissism. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you get a little church mouse who's got something to say, but they are so scared. Somewhere in the middle, you've got confidence. And also, my dad always used to say, you must be confident, particularly in business. And sometimes people will construe your confidence as being arrogant. But if your confidence is rooted in humility, not by telling someone that you're humble, but just the way that you operate. And what are some of the elements of that? Empathy, not necessarily sympathy in business. Sympathy that's a whole different conversation. You've got to have empathy. You've got to be people-led. And there's got to be humility. And if you build that into your confidence, that kind of confidence, certainly for me, is the confidence I would seek in a leader that I would follow. I don't, unfortunately, do well anymore with people that are just blatantly arrogant or narcissistic. So I would do, if I know I can't affect any change in that relationship or in that scenario, there's nothing I can do about the new president, then I rather look at what happens around that. How can I affect change in something that person or those persons might impact on?
That's a big word, narcissism. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I've been diving a lot into the character traits of someone that is a narcissist. And purely because a loved one has experience with this person.
Right.
And so it's extremely common. That's the first thing. Second thing I have to say is that it's very common in leadership and successful people. And, of course, basic definition is it's my way or the highway. That's the typical, narcissist. No empathy and just steamrolling through people. But what I found is that these individuals do become successful. They do run companies. They do become millionaires and billionaires. And I'm like, am I missing something?
Nathan, that's a tough one. I often hear people saying these days, Elon Musk this, and then speak about Steve Jobs then, and this, that, and the other. There's a reality, at some point Elon Musk, like all of us, will not be here anymore. And so what will his legacy be? Perhaps some of his businesses. Human beings or people who drive for financial success at all costs, being arrogant and even narcissistic, personally, I don't particularly care for. Do I ever see within that, if there is a business being created that might benefit humankind or the planet, then I distinguish between the two. A great example is American politics. Actually, most countries, right? So Republican Party, Democratic Party, for many years were the sort of beacon for democracy. The Republican Party per se, even with Trump as president, they're not going to just have the country implode. There are enough checks and balances. It's just a real pity that from a perceptual point of view, someone like him becomes president, because just look at a school. You now have to teach children, this is the president, you've got to respect him. And you look at all the things that he's done and what he's been indicted for. It's like when Zuma was president. You go, this is the president of the country, supposed to be symbolically leading. Then it gets philosophically very murky. Musk, at the risk of provoking, at some point I had a lot of respect for what he was building. I think in the last year or so, there are traits that he's exhibited, in my opinion, that perhaps isn't conducive to shaping a better world necessarily. Certainly a better world for some, but not for all. Maybe I'm showing my socialist tendencies here, but so there are sufficient, maybe I should counter that by saying there are sufficient businesses, magnificent businesses, billionaires, right, who have done as well, if not better than Musk, who has done it in a respectable way with empathy. One of the slides I sometimes put up in a keynote is a photograph of a gentleman called Armancio Ortega. Do you know who that is?
Mm-mm.
It's good because he famously said that he doesn't want anybody to recognize him except his family. His business contributes something like 8% to the Galician economy in Spain and 1.5% to the Spanish economy. His business is called Inditex. Most people have never heard of Inditex. If I say Zara, though,
of course.
Depending on how much money he gives away for philanthropy, he's either the 20th or the 25th richest person in the world. So he's built an entire business, and he was a dressmaker. He worked in a shirt shop, made dresses and shirts in Coruña, where my wife is from. So I respect someone like him who's done it the old-fashioned way.
Mm.
I've come to respect Steve Jobs because in Apple I, he was very arrogant, but in his own Steve Jobs way, he created something. A lot of people forget that his last products before he got fired by John Scully was disasters. The Lisa was a disaster. It was a vain, project of vanity.
Mm.
So Steve Jobs went out and he did what he did. He came back to Apple, and then he applied good old-fashioned business sense and leadership, and he turned Apple around, appointed people like Tim Cook and Johnny Ive, and by all accounts created a culture, whether you love or hate Apple, that made something that was about to go chapter 11, made it in a very successful business.
Mm.
And somewhere in there, I think he regained his humility. He was very confident, he was still arrogant, and he was absolutely a perfectionist. So I prefer to follow and use people like that as examples than people who at all cost achieve fame and particularly wealth. But there's always, and this is philosophically challenging, right? So you could argue, well, if someone is really rich, you admire them for what they've achieved, but they did that at a cost. And if you understand the cost,
100%.
Then you've got a moral dilemma. If you were wanting to be, let's say, Elon Musk, what would you sacrifice in your own values to achieve? And I'm afraid I don't buy the argument that just because you're a genius, people should admire you for that. You get people who are geniuses, men and women, by the way, who actually are just simply arseholes. And, and does not set an example from their behavior point of view. So that I come back to context and perception. So what I normally tend to do is, what can I learn from that? So I love this Tesla story. I love what he's done with SpaceX, no doubt. I mean, that's a magnificent success story. There comes a point where the person becomes bigger than the business, and that's normally when you're in dangerous territory.
I think that's a really good point about, you mentioned so many good things there, but essentially what I took from that is, at what cost? Because that, for me, is something that I think about. If you really want to build something at scale and of value and, that's going to make mass impact, I really believe that there's going to be some sacrifice. But I don't believe that it has to be sacrificing values, which is another point that you said. I think that you can do it with good people around you who are all rowing in the same direction. Yeah. Like the Ortega's gentleman?
Armando Ortega.
Gentleman. I think thank you for bringing that up, because we need more stories like that.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate but fortunate for him that he was out of the limelight. But the fact that we can share stories like that and show people that there's many ways to skin a cat, essentially. Were you doing the same thing in corporate? Working for Levi's,
yes,
multiple alcohol companies. What were you doing differently that essentially you became such an asset that, you were called to go to Europe and work in the Netherlands? What were you doing differently?
I think for most of my career, and this is what I got taught by amazing mentors, I focused on putting together a good team. And a good team isn't just mercenaries top of their game, it's also people who can develop. And with great teams, always putting them first, driving them, leading them. I have a deep and a fundamental belief in the power of strong leadership. And it was combined also with a sense of there must be a different way, or there can be a different way. I'll give you an example. When I joined Gilbey's as marketing director, Gilbey's in South Africa became Guinness UDV when the merger took place in the late 90s to form Diageo. So we were Gilbey's, we merged, and then became Brand House. I got given an opportunity at a very young age, which I'm eternally grateful for, by the then CEO, Gary May, who was my third mentor. And I said, Gary, wow, this is a huge job. I mean, are you serious? He said, yes. He appointed a sales director who was seasoned SAB, Pancho Steyn. He said, you and Pancho will find each other, and Pancho is still a very good friend today. Gary has sadly passed on. And Gary said, first thing you need to do is there are two agencies, there's been some nepotism, you've got to fire them. You can decide what you want to do, because as you can imagine, the Gilbey's portfolio of brands was a big one. It was a big spender. And something I'd learned from Dr. Rupert was find new and young talent. So even then I went and looked for entrepreneurs. So I went and sourced individuals in the advertising industry. Two gentlemen who was with Ogilvy. I said, if you leave Ogilvy, because I knew they wanted to, I will give you brands. And that's how King James started. Nota bene. So quite a few agencies started off Gilbey's, but young. Bull Covered Pace were only 13 people. And Matthew Bull went on, he's a global creative director today for ANBF, SAB NBF. And there was a combination of instinct and mentorship by Gary saying, it's okay, make the decision. Levi's was the same. When I got the opportunity to lead Levi's in South Africa, the first thing that struck me is how fundamentally solid the Levi's values were from the founding fathers' days. Here's a fun fact. I don't know if you know that the only factory that Levi Strauss still owns in the world is in Epping. Did you know that?
No.
Yep. Why? Because Bob Haas, at the time was CEO in 1994, came to South Africa, met with Mr. Mandela, committed to building a factory, and also committed to never close it. And so in 2007-8, Levi's went through a global restructure, closed all its factories, and outsourced, as they should. They had a supply chain strategy that outsourced. But because of a handshake, that factory still today is owned, and it won't be closed because the Levi Strauss values has honored that. Now, the great thing is the Levi Strauss factory runs profitably. And on occasion, certainly when I was CEO, we used to export 501s to America under AGOA because America didn't have enough 501s. So that was the first thing we contributed. The second thing, I found sort of within 6 months, we weren't doing as much business in the African female market and couldn't figure out why. So I said, did anybody ever done research here? No, we know people love Levi's. So we brought in some focus groups, and what South African women were telling us, we love your brand, but you're not, and I quote, you're not making jeans that fit our booty. So it became Project Booty, and our team developed a block, it's called the block, around which we engineered a female jean. That jean was then called the Eva jean, first woman. It was a runaway success. I mean, within 6 months, we gained 13% market share just by giving consumers what they want. They loved the brand, just didn't have a fit. Today, I speak on a correction, but there's 7 blocks that Levi's use globally. And then they would do different variations, fashion variations, but the blocks, it's the 501 obviously. And our original Eva jean block is still in the 7, so it's a South African invention. Based on a very simple, let's talk to the consumers and find out from them. And it was such a simple thing. And it was amazing. I think somewhere on my LinkedIn there's a little video that CNN did, how African women said, man, we love Levi's, and we love our booty, but it just didn't fit. And quite often, if you scratch behind great brand success stories, you'll find that there was a very clear understanding of what people need, and if they didn't yet need it, it was created. Steve Jobs with the iPod was a great example. At the time, there were lots of MP3 players that were technically far superior. The Sony ones were in sound, but Steve Jobs made it. He said, "Music in your pocket," and the rest is history.
That's so cool, because what you're speaking about, before you spoke about the Levi's, were the meeting customer demand, was essentially saying that a great team can propel any company.
Correct.
And that's such a good point. And this is something that I'm also learning about, the hiring process when it comes to, growing this business out, is spending a lot of time in the recruitment process.
Yes.
Because a bad apple can essentially make your entire bunch go rotten. And that's the analogy I also like to use.
You're so right. There's certainly, in the last 10 years, I've seen huge moves globally in leadership and in people management into right brain thinking, empathy training, the value of team, everybody takes care of each other, and CEOs increasingly being trained in how to lead with empathy and how to lead by developing people. Where every now and then you get someone who naturally does that, and people will follow them to the ends of the earth. Like someone like Steve Jobs was like that. But you also get CEOs today in the world. Indra Nooyi, she was the CEO of Pepsi. So when she joined, she realized Pepsi was tired. And first thing she did was to appoint a chief design officer, which was unheard of. Why would we need a chief design officer? And he's still there, by the way, Mauro Porcini, Italian. And from soup to nuts, hook tot kant, from business cards to vending machines to desk layouts to pack design, set about internally first getting the staff to really love the brand again by saying, we're going to create new desks for you. You're going to actually love coming to the office. Your vending machines will be personalized to you. So if you came to the vending machine, you touch it, it says, "Hi, Nathan, you're regular? Thanks." And then Pepsi Max would pop out. I mean, it's a simple thing like that. They then extended that into the consumer realm. I haven't looked at Pepsi for a while, but they certainly started aggressively taking market share away from everybody else. But that was a leadership decision taken by Indra Nooyi as the leader, saying, I'm going to invest in people, But I can't just say, I'm going to teach you. I'm going to create a brand attraction internally that makes you love Pepsi again. And through that, people's generally productivity and morale just raised. Now, I've always believed in that, and I went about it a long and roundabout way, answering your question earlier. I would say today the fundamental single lesson that I've learned over time is that if you have a motivated staff complement, whether it's big, like a Levi's team, or small as a startup, and you can align the values of your company with that of the people to the largest degree, 90%, you're probably in a far better position to be successful than not. And it's just been proven time and time again. So it's one of those cases, don't trust me, look at the results.
100%. I mean, I heard this term from Steve Jobs. It's called A-level players.
Correct.
And there was actually a study done that showed A-level players versus, everyone else, like the average Joe. And if that A-level player was in a team with more than 5 average Joes, that A-level player actually reduces their productivity and overall zest by, I think, 30%. I could be mistaken.
Correct.
But if that non-A-level player is in a team of A-level players, they improve their overall productivity and their zest by, I think, 15%.
Correct.
So that's such an interesting study to show actually, these A-level players and who you're surrounded by that actually lifts you up or brings you down double the amount.
It's interesting. You remind me, Nathan, there's something else that I also need to add. And it's a tough one. When you run a business, whether it's your own or someone else's, you don't have the luxury or the moral comfort of keeping on board people because they're nice people, right? You still have to deliver the goods. Steve Jobs' attitude about A-level players was complemented by bringing in A-level potentials, which is often missed. So people with the potential to be A players, because if I come in as a youngster or I've got a few rough edges, but I work with Johnny Iver, Tim Cook, and many others, and he took a bet on that. So if you just went about appointing a team of mercenaries, like every single person is so super intelligent and perhaps have no EQ, then depending on what type of company you build, right? So you've always got to have that blend of EQ and IQ, and then because it's a business, put in some FQ, financial intelligence. One thing I learned as an entrepreneur, which I didn't really appreciate when I was with Levi's, I had a salary, was cash flow 101, right? If you on the 30th of November can't pay your bills, that's a challenge, right? Dr. Rupert always used to say you can have a R1 billion business and make 10 Rand loss. You're making a loss. You can have a 100 Rand business and make 10 Rand profit. You're a profitable business. The principles are the same. So you have to populate your business, develop and train and recruit for having the best people in their particular roles, which in today's terms simply means do the homework. Don't trust algorithms and CVs alone. Test for cultural fit, test for chemistry, right? These days, if you, and I'm generalizing, if you are recruiting for a particular role, you'll probably have 5 CVs which looks and feels the same. They're all table stakes. I remember when I was still sort of in the recruiting game, having to recruit people, I always had 3 or 4 CVs knowing that any one of them can do the job competency-wise. What I was looking for more was that other thing that you don't necessarily find in a CV: grit, resilience, EQ.
Is that the potential?
It's the potential. And potential, from 2 points of view, potential to take on board a challenge and really work it hard, not be complacent, or not asking the business to give them all the tools. And secondly, a level of entrepreneurship or innovational thinking. And I'm talking in my frame of reference. I mean, there are companies, you don't want a doctor to experiment, right? If you've got neurosurgery, you want him to actually do what he's done 100 times before. So it's obviously horses for courses, but in a business context. And I find that with entrepreneurs all the time, right? There's a reason why statistically only 10% really make it, properly make it, right? The rest fall out, and some of them fall out pretty quickly. And there are businesses that have failed spectacularly with the smartest PhD level engineers, right? But the thing that has made eventually great business is even greater is when entrepreneurs have shown the grit and the resilience. And that is often, I've seen that in the few podcasts that I looked at and listened to, that's what entrepreneurs and leaders will share with you. Nteto Nyati wrote a lovely book, There's a Darkie in the Boardroom. I don't know if you read it. And you see how he became who he becomes. A friend of mine, Nyampini Mabunda, just wrote a book called Take Charge. So I appointed Nyampini at age 23 into Smirnoff at Gilbey's.
Wow.
So at the time, Gilbey's, the entire marketing team was white, not a single person of color. There were no females in any management positions. So the very first appointment I made, not because Nyampini was a black South African, because he was incredibly competent. And he proved himself to be a spectacular marketing manager. To this very day, he still calls me boss. Makes me cringe. But he's a very good friend of mine. And his wife, Mosima, serves with me on a global health NGO board. And so what he did, he wrote a book called Take Charge, where he shares his leadership lessons. He was the CEO of General Electric and serves on a number of boards. And as I saw when I was young, someone taking a punt on me, I just took a punt on him and many others, and I still do today. Because that's a circle of mentorship life. Sometimes you see in someone something that you like. I mean, I don't mind admitting when I read about you and what you've done, there's something there. So eventually, you might take your podcast, turn it into a book, and you might end up being, I don't know, Graham Norton, or I've forgotten his name, the CEO podcast guy.
Stephen Bartlett.
Yes. Who knows?
Yeah, one of my heroes.
I don't know you, but I have to assume that you already are thinking. But that's a good thing, because as you do that, and particularly because you have a very public-facing product, right? Invariably, you'll inspire other people. And that, in my opinion, is such a great win, because you don't necessarily find all the stuff you need in books. You sometimes need to look at someone who's actually doing it or has done it and say, okay, what can I learn from them?
100%. Firstly, thanks for that, Mike. And, you know, my mind is just going crazy all over the place. But what I'm getting from this is, and this is just from first-hand experience, that's resilience part.
Yes.
There's been so many times where, so my background is in engineering, and then I transitioned. I started a business when I was, still studying. And COVID hit, business had to stop, consulted as an engineer, made some money from that, picked up the business again, continued running it. But I got to a point in 2022, where I was working 2 jobs as an engineer, making a lot of money, as well as running the business on the side. And I got to a point where I was like, why am I doing this? And completely burnt out, because I know I was burnt out because I couldn't get out of bed. I wasn't depressed because it was a short amount of time. So you just have no hope or no excitement, right? Fast forward a bit, try to, get my supplies to run the business and just pay me on the side. Left both jobs as an engineer, and then I was like, what's next? Started another business that failed like 4 or 5 months later. That was more of a bad business partner than anything else. And then started the podcast. But in that journey, I realized that resilience has to be key. I didn't have another option I didn't want to go and work with someone else or work as an engineer because I know what the result will be. I experienced it. So then I was like, cool, let me grow this podcast and let me grow this into a business. But resilience is key, because there's been so many times where I was like, where's the money coming from? And I really have to hustle and really have to be innovative with the business model and revenue streams, because you just don't know. And even speaking to people on the podcast, that's one thing that I know is like that there's this internal fire that keeps them going. And I always ask myself, like, can that be taught? Or is it something that's intrinsically...
That's a great question. So I believe it can be taught. I'm a great example, right? When I was an entrepreneur, I guess, at school, I had tropical fish and I baked for pocket money. I did lots of things. Then did the thing at school, you do an aptitude test. No, you're an accountant, so BCom accounting. Here I come. I ended up being the first and only student in 1988 getting the BCom general degree. I just took subjects that fitted. And then I went into corporates. I still didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And Dr. Rupert started the Small Business Development Corporation in South Africa. He was an unbelievable supporter of entrepreneurship. He also, by the way, started WWF in South Africa.
Wow.
Just as I'm privileged to be a trustee of that today. But anyway, and he always said, one day when you're ready, right, I kept contact with him after varsity, and I got to know him quite well. He said, one day when you're ready, start a business. And then when I came back from Europe, I said, let me start a business. How difficult can it be? And that was probably the last check that my ego wrote. I was great as Levi. So how difficult can it be? I started a little agency. And then I went to all my network and said, I'm going to do advertising. And I remember going to Diageo, marketing director at the time, Gavin Pike. Gavin said, Mike, you appointed half the agencies here. How on earth do you expect me to fire them and appoint you? That's not going to work. And he was right. He was 100% right. So I had to literally roll up my sleeves. And then I realized that grit and that perseverance for an entrepreneur is crucial. I think I inherently had it, but it was latent whilst I was in corporates. I applied a version of it by doing things differently at Levi's. Well, I think I did some of the things differently. There were many times where I didn't quite conform. But it was only tested when I was an entrepreneur. And subsequently, I've invested in a few businesses. So I've invested in 3 100% black-owned businesses. Those I don't have any equity. My only request of the entrepreneurs is you have to pay it forward. Other businesses, I would take some skin. So Lucky, or Tamsankwa is his real name, he lives in Hermanus. He was the PRO of a soccer team that I used to sponsor in Swelihle many years ago. Said, Lucky, what do you want to do in life? No, I want to be an electrician. At the time, with a matric, he was working for an electrician, got paid pittance. So helped him through Technikon. He got his master's electrician's ticket. He now runs a building company called Ngojo. He chose the name, so his surname is Ngoloti and I'm Joubert, so Ngojo.
Wow.
My daughter is a great designer. She did the logo for him. He runs 3 teams. He's got 3 vehicles. Lucky is a grafter. Grit, resilience. And I said to him, Lucky, when you start your business, particularly in building, your word is your bond, right? You've got to engender trust, build a brand, because builders don't always have that. And thirdly, if you say you're going to do something by Friday, do it. And if it doesn't work out, then you give the money back. And so what Lucky has done is, on that principle, plus his values, plus his grit and resilience, he's actually built a wonderful business. Brajo installs DSTVs. Same thing. He used to work for an installer, got paid pittance. He's probably the best cable installation guy I've ever met. Introduced him to Neergestad Hermanus, all that home. So he's done. Anyway, Brajo now runs a business, employs 2 people. Baba Aya in Strand Street's got a hole in the wall, bought him a coffee machine, said, you've got to be a destination because people can go around the corner to Vida or to Seattle. So what's happened? Small hole in the wall in Strand Street. If you're ever there, go get some coffee. Baba Aya should give it to you for free. And he's developed a clientele who comes to him for the banter and for good coffee.
I love it.
Yeah, but so my point there is you don't have to always just invest or support a potential unicorn tech startup, right? In South African terms, you can help other people as well. In Baba Aya's life or in Lucky's life, it wasn't a massive investment, but that investment just enabled them to now actively contribute to the economy, which is what entrepreneurship eventually should become. A whole host of entrepreneurs across the board that collectively, as you of all people know, because you are an entrepreneur, you said goodbye to engineering probably for now anyway, and you've taken a tougher road.
100%. I think, before we go into the investing part, I really want to ask about this point. And what's coming to my mind is the resilience part of you leaving corporate, going and being an entrepreneur. And then you said you developed the grit a bit later on. So do you think that that's a result of not having a plan B or a safety net?
That's a great question. Yes, it is. So I made a few mistakes with my first business. One of them was to just say, how difficult can it be? Bootstrapped it. So I put my pension into it, my Levi's pension, and I took a mortgage out on my apartment. I didn't pay myself for 2.5 years. Many other entrepreneurs have the story. And I was hell-bent on paying salaries. I did at some point have to retrench. But our fortunes were changed around completely when we got to pitch for e-bucks at F&B. And then the business just flew. But I realized sort of halfway in, this requires much more than intellect. This isn't about being clever with money. This is about, can we survive? And, went and saw clients, hounded Harley Davidson for their business, which they eventually gave us. Nothing just walks through the door. if starting a business was easy, everybody would do it and everybody would be, rich. It doesn't work that way. You got to actually work at it.
100%.
Even then, there are no guarantees. I chose an industry and a business that most of my mates had already built agencies over the last 10, 20 years, right? I was competing with the King Jameses of the world and the Saatchis of the world. But I built a business with people. There were 41 of us when I exited to the Publicis Group. And even then, it wasn't, I knew nothing about doing deals. A really good mate of mine, who's an investor, I'd known for 21 years, said to him, Larry, you need to help me sell this business. He, at the time, specialized in M&A and the media and advertising business. And he helped me exit in a healthy way. First time in my life, I had capital, or that amount of capital. So how the heck do I invest? So I tapped 2 friends who I trusted in the business. One of them said, look, just put some money in Knife Capital. They're a great VC. Today I'm an investor and a venture partner there, which I love. And for the rest, I just said, okay, well, take my life lessons. Who would I invest in? So then I chose businesses that I, first and foremost, look at the founder. I don't want to see a pitch deck. Like, do you have scars and medals? Is there something about you? Sometimes you also recognize this founder will probably last 3 years. At some point, you need to be honest with them. You'll need a CEO. You're not a CEO, but you're a great founder to actually run this, because most startups at some point, if they're successful, becomes a business. Steve Jobs learned that the hard way in the first, I call it Apple 1 and 2, right? Apple 1 brought on board John Scully from PepsiCo, and then he promptly fired him.
Do you think that that's because of attachment? Because founders, I resonate with this. Like, I'm very attached. I'm well aware that I'm attached to my craft and what I'm doing. But I know that a lot of founders are attached to the point that they take things personally. And I think that's
you're right. No, that's a good point. You are right. There's also, I believe, a difference between a founder and an entrepreneur. A founder can found the business, entrepreneurial tendencies, but proper entrepreneurs, as per definition, brings on board more business sense. And there are great examples. Andreessen Horowitz, for instance. The two of them, like Ben Horowitz and Andreessen. Andreessen is more of a founder. Ben has always been the sort of financial entrepreneur. So between the two of them, founded an amazing business, but the two of them work well. If you take agencies, Alistair King and James Barty, who started King James, right? James is a wonderful guy, but he was always the suit. Like, he's the guy who sits with the client and chases the checks. Alistair is the creative. But the two of them work really well, so they complement each other. Single founders or entrepreneurs, a little bit more difficult. I'm working in a business at the moment as a fractional CEO called iExperience. The founder is just one of the most visionary founders I've met. Saw a gap, took it, and he's built a really strong business. But by his own admission, he's not necessarily a CEO. And so sometimes that conversation has to be had. And the toughest part of it is when a founder or CEO when a founder doesn't see that. And there are enough case studies of founders who fought with the board. The other dynamic, of course, which you're well aware of, is the moment you take someone else's money, you are going to get advice. And that advice comes with a price tag. You get told at some point what you must and must not do. And that's tough. If it's your money and your business, you can do with it what you want. You will fail or succeed by that. The moment you take a shareholder on board, you now have a different dynamic.
100%.
Which, by the way, is not a bad thing. So my advice there always is be really clear on what kind of capital you want to take, right? If you can, don't do equity. If it's really early, have an angel, or in seed, have a safe note. But if you can, find an investor who also brings value to the table, someone who's got business experience or can introduce you to a portfolio of companies that might have some synergy to what you do.
And I think to that point, it's also just as how the shareholder and investor picks the founder, I think the founder should also pick.
Exactly.
It works two ways. Because this is something, it's a lot of responsibility to take someone's money. And I wouldn't take a stranger's money. You have to really know that person, know their values, what they stand for. Even if they can't see the vision, do they at least, trust you? I think that's a big point. It's
very refreshing that you see it that way. But again, you're spot on. I think there is sometimes perhaps more of a majority tendency of entrepreneurs to say, "Oh, we'll take any money," right?
Of course.
But if you really believe in yourself and you know you have something good, and that's tough because you sometimes. I'm a firm believer in having an advisory committee or a board. I serve on a few of those, and I love being there with other smart people helping the founders. But looking for an investor and vetting them probably will impress the investor more, but will also allow you to make the decision with more scrutiny and more diligence. Great example of probably the world's biggest or one of the biggest VCs is Sequoia, right? So in 2016, end of 2016, Sequoia changed their entire brand proposition. Up until that time, if you looked at all their communication and their website, they were a VC company. I don't know when last you look at Sequoia's website. Look at it today. What is the one and only line on the landing page? It says simply, "We help the daring build legendary companies." Then they have tiles below that change every day. Success stories, information about someone they're invested in. It's the most refreshing website, and what they decided and realized was we don't have to tell the world we're a VC. We really want the best entrepreneurs to choose us because we know they've got options. And to know, yeah.
To this point, I actually had a look at the website after I heard you on the panel.
Yes. Oh, okay. So then you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
100%.
Yeah. It's such a simple
makes-
thing, but it's so their marketing, for want of a better word, is kind of clear from their website. These are the people we're interested in. It's not going to stop everybody perhaps to apply, and that you're still going to get a lot of rejections. But there might be that one person who's, do I choose Anderson or do I use Y Combinator or Startup Bootcamp, Sequoia? And I know that their partners are also geared to have proper conversations with founders. They don't look at pitch decks. They really try and understand who the person is, where do you come from, what have you done before. They do more than just a financial and a tech diligence, DD. They really understand the people, the founder and the founding team.
And I think that's really important.
Oh, it's crucial.
People DD as opposed to just, the financial stuff.
So how many people do you know that do people DDs?
Very few. And this is something that I've also been speaking to people about. I mean, currently I'm attending ACES, which is the early stage Africa investment. I'm speaking to a lot of VCs and asking them about their process on people.
Right.
And not many do a long period of due diligence. And I understand why, but I also don't understand why. I understand why from a business point of view. Like they have capital, the business perhaps also needs money. They're at a growth stage and they want to deploy as quick as possible, perhaps. And pipeline, like there's so many applications. How do you do it for all the applications that you want to invest in?
Right.
So I understand the challenges, but of course on the other side of it is a VC, for example, is also taking other people's money. So there's responsibility on that side.
Of course. That's very true. I'm an investor, and so as an LP, I would expect the VC firm to be prudent with my money. I also understand as an LP that there's always risk. I've put my money at risk. But there's some ground rules. So you would expect your VC to do any and all things possible to vet the portcos properly, the people who work there. And I know Knife does that. I'm biased, so I must say that up front. But Knife Capital has a wonderful philosophy, and they also have the Grindstone Accelerator, which has been sort of a experimental innovation hotbed to seek what could be a high potential. From there has come quite a few companies that they've invested in. There are a few of the companies that have come through Grindstone that have actually also gone on to exit, having not been invested by Knife, but actually used Grindstone as a learning platform.
Wow.
So, and there are many other VCs who do the same. It's not just Knife. Broadly speaking, the VC industry, particularly in South Africa, in the last 2 or 3 years have gone through a major shift. 3 or 4 years, when was it? Certainly pre-COVID and sort of post-COVID, there were still high valuations, a lot of capital flowed, and then if you look at the stats, the investments just tapered off. There was more of a fear. We can't just invest, especially not invest in future, returns. It's back to the basics. Let's invest in a company that shows revenue, that shows even a bit of profit. Valuation isn't high, but the shift has been, we'll stick with you longer and we'll do 2 or 3 rounds. So like any industry in the world, doesn't matter, pick an industry, from time to time they go through changes and they have to evolve or adapt. VCs, broadly speaking, even private equity, have gone through a few shifts in the last 30 years.
And I really hope that there's more capital that flows into the continent.
Exactly. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In this season of your life, you're doing many things. The Billy Bow Group, being a chairman on the board on, many companies. What drives you?
What drives me? It's going to sound strange, but gratitude. I've thought about it a lot. I've been asked the question a lot. I feel grateful to be able to do something. I feel grateful to add value, and I feel particularly grateful to help other people be better. And I would immediately say that's what I learned from my dad and from Dr. Rupert. Why? Because it feels freaking good. It feels amazing to help and see someone do better. And I can do that now. I have the privilege of doing that. Knowing I don't have any ambition to be a super wealthy unicorn in anything. What I do want to do is see how many people I can still work with before I'm not able to. I recently saw, I'm a big Boss fan, Springsteen. There's a great documentary on Netflix about his roadshow. I don't know if you saw it.
I'm going to watch it. I saw the trailer. It looks so good.
Look, I tell you what, forget it. Even if you don't like Bruce Springsteen, the whole documentary is shot in such a way that I have so much respect for what he's been through with his band. But at the end, last 15 minutes, he talks about the fact that this is it. He knows who he is. He knows what he has done. He's never had ambition beyond that. He wants to play until he falls over on stage. I don't necessarily want to work until I fall over. But what I do know is I don't have any more boxes to tick other than saying what I do have the privilege of doing, do it well. Be present. And also, don't say yes to so many things anymore. There was a point where I would just I'll do a coffee with you. It's not sustainable. So I've had to be really clear with myself, with self-awareness, to say what I choose to do, be productive, not busy. And it's very simple. If I serve on a board, I prepare for the board meetings, I'm there, I'm in the meeting, and I add my value. Then I go and I do something else. And why is that doable? Because there are many people that you and I both admire who's managed to do that. And I believe now, as I look back and forward, at least for another year or two, it's possible. Like we were taught you need one job and you can't do more than one thing. It's nonsense. You see yourself already.
Yeah.
As long as you don't stretch yourself too far. And then the last piece I would put in there, you absolutely have to make the time and carve it out for yourself and your family. It's not so much balance of life. Like for me, you have a life and you weave into that your business and your personal. And that takes time and discipline. I'm of an age now and I'm at the end of a wonderful career, or almost at the end of a wonderful career, where this is just life since business began, saying you will not know that when you're young. If I look back, if I'd known then what I know now, but it doesn't work that way.
Of course not.
My daughter's 29. So I've realized I can't tell her, oh, but I know because I'm 60, this is what you should do. Instead, I do what I had the privilege of having, is I try and mentor her. Think of this, be curious, challenge yourself. Why is that important? You've got the decision to make between two options, right? Both are right options. But if you choose A, you're going to forfeit B benefits. And if you choose B, you're going to forfeit A's benefits. Don't see it as a right or wrong. So little lessons like that, you only get to be better at making decisions by making them, and for that you need time. So the older you get, the longer you make decisions over time. Eventually you start trusting your gut more. And if you're halfway successful, then you tend to be more successful, but not so much in the money-making stuff and the life stuff. As the life stuff, I can say today to you, when you're ready, just embrace that. Find enough time to do what you want to do, because you can, but never give up on that. Don't build a business at all costs. It's just not worth it.
It's funny because when you are speaking about telling your daughter what to do. I'm 29.
Yeah.
And I know my parents will be listening or watching. And when they tell me what to do, I'm like, I don't listen. But I do. It's not that I don't listen. It's that I'd like to experience and then learn the lesson.
Nathan, I like that. I would say the same to you. Again, as I said earlier, I don't know you. The fact that I'm sitting here with you today, I do get requests for these things from time to time. I generally say no, but there was something about this that I wanted to do.
No, thank you.
Well, you're welcome. I can't tell you why, though. So this is just an instinctive thing.
Mm.
So as you or my daughter or anybody else, for that matter, builds a business at this age, you need to push the limits, put in the grind.
Mm.
Not me, not a book, not Steve Jobs, not Elon Musk is ever going to tell you what to do. You can certainly assimilate from them learnings, but you've got to carve your own path. Because if you do that in time, probably in your case, other people are going to look up to you and say, I want to do what he did, or what was his success. And that I love most about business and an entrepreneurial ecosystem is I still tend to learn stuff from people where I say, I can use that. My core is strong enough. It's been forged over time. I don't mess with my core, which is my values, who I am. Mm. But my core is flexible. I can adapt and learn something. Say, okay, I didn't have that 30 years ago. There was no internet, but today I can use it. Mm. But I will use it if it adds value. I'm not going to use a digital tool just because the world says I should use ChatGPT or AI. And the reason is because I don't need it. In my life, I don't need that. Other people might definitely need it for what they do. And it's horses for courses.
Mike, the last part of the podcast is called the Fast Fire. This has been incredible.
What?
The Fast Fire.
Fast Fire?
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you these Fast Fire quick questions.
Sure.
And then if you could answer in a word or short sentence, that would be perfect. If you were president for a day, to steal Bruce Whitfield from his book, if you were president for a day, what's one thing you would change or improve about South Africa?
Education. I would put any and all resources into education. I would clean it up. I would get professionals, people from private sector in there. Why? Because that investment will have a long-term effect. We're struggling to put out fires and put plasters on things, where the heart of it is there's a new generation waiting. That's why I love having been part of Collective X. So, president for a day, I would fire and hire as much as I can to just say, this is what we invest. I'll enshrine it in law if I have to, invest in education, clean up the schools, build the schools. Yeah,
I like that. You mentioned 3 influential mentors. Could you please give me one lesson from each of them?
I can. So, my lesson from Dr. Rupert is Doc was a Renaissance person, so he had a big love, deep love for art. He was patron of many art preservation societies. He started the National Heritage Fund in South Africa that protects old buildings. He started WWF. So what I learned from him is it's okay to pay it forward. It is in fact imperative. If you are successful, you have to pay it forward. And you don't have to be... I can't swear. So you don't have to be a poopball to be good at business. But you've got to be clear on doing business properly. From my dad, he was a coach, and he instilled curiosity. So my dad was he was the purveyor of curiosity. If anything had a pip or a stem, he would plant it. He had green fingers, just to see if he could. So his garden, he farmed orchids for many years. And Dad was be curious, test, provoke. From Gary May, the single thing I learned from him, I met him when I was at Varsity. He was with SAB, is invest in young talent, back young talent. And I mean young, not just talent, young talent. And back young talent, particularly if you see there's leadership in there. I unfortunately know that there's a massive deficit in leadership in the world, political and in business. There are more leaders in entrepreneurship, I think, than there are in business, which is not a bad thing. So Gary taught me, when you're ready, invest in young talent. And today I love doing that. Because, who knows? You could be the next president in 20 years' time. It's always a possibility. Odds pretty steep, but who knows?
Thanks for that, but I like the private sector.
Yeah, I thought you would say that. I agree with you, by the way.
Where can people support you? How can we support your businesses? Of course, you investor in Knife Capital, so people should check out Knife Capital and perhaps apply for some VC-backed funding if you're ready. But what else can you share with us?
If anyone is able to, and I'm thinking more of your listenership, right? In paying it forward or contributing to the ecosystem or to a network, right? Whatever you take out, you must put in. You don't have to just put in money. You can give knowledge or you can give network. So that the request is just consciously, how can I actually help someone today? If someone, there are lots of WhatsApp groups and LinkedIn groups where people ask, does anybody know? Contribute to that or join that. So that sense of, let's give a little bit more of myself if I can, beyond just what I do, I can definitely attest to the fact that it feels good and also it builds your network.
100%. I can definitely say that giving is better than receiving. The feeling, rather.
It is, and it does come back at you. I can hand on heart say that you should never give to receive. That I must just say up front. The more you do give back in whatever way you can, and you see it coming back in the weirdest of ways sometimes. Someone say, Mike, I heard you speak at a conference. Then you go, okay, I'm glad that made a difference. Why? Because when I was young, I remember listening and looking at other people. I said, that makes sense. Most people who inspired me at a young age, I never got to tell them, thanks for doing that. Some of them already long past. So I guess in another kind of way, just acknowledge if someone inspires you or contributes to your well-being or to your business success, tell them, thank you. You didn't have to, but I appreciate what you said, or I appreciated the podcast. I've seen some of the comments on your podcast. They are people who authentically say, Nathan, thanks, this is great, I learned something. Which means if there's just one comment to that effect, it means your podcast is successful. Why? Because in business, if you make one sale, it means your business is successful. You've got to sustain it, get more of those, but it means there's a place for it. So.
100%. That's such a good point.
Yeah.
But Mike, thank you. This was super insightful. Thank you for your time. And I think what I got most from this is paying it forward. I mean, you've shared so many lessons with us today, but paying it forward, I think that is something that really stuck out for me. So thank you for being an example of that and sharing your wisdom with us today.
You're welcome. Sorry for the swearing, but I trust it was useful. It's also been a real pleasure to meet you in person.
Thank you.
And I wish you lots of success with not only your podcast, but as you build a media empire. I'll be watching you with great interest.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay.